141 members of parliament, all from the opposition, are now suspended, leading the opposition to quip that what the BJP really wants is an opposition mukh parliament. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo story. The conflagration, the confrontation between the opposition and the Modi government began over the demand from the opposition that the Prime Minister and the Home Minister make statements on the floor of the House on the recent security breach in Parliament. The trigger for the latest round of suspensions evidently are placards that members of the opposition carried inside the House that seem to show the Prime Minister in a meme form with his lips zipped. The Parliamentary Affairs Minister later said that this was offensive to the post of the Prime Minister. A controversy also erupted after a TMC member of Parliament mimicked Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar. Mr. Dhankar called what had happened ridiculous and offensive. Among the members of Parliament who have been suspended is Congress Member of Parliament Shashi Tharoor, who actually took to Twitter saying that he went towards the well of the House for the first time in his 15 years as a parliamentarian, and he was expecting a suspension. Moments later, it came. To talk about the politics of this moment, what the opposition might do next, and what this showdown actually captures, let's introduce our newsmaker on the program today, suspended Member of Parliament, at least for the remaining length of this winter session. Shashi Tharoor joins us. Have you ever been suspended before from anything?
From nothing. I was always a good boy in the class, so it's a particularly, shall we say, remarkable experience for me to be amongst the wicked ones whom the monitor has to punish. But the truth is that it became impossible not to stand in solidarity with all the colleagues who've been unjustly suspended by the system. I won't even blame the speaker as an individual. There is a system at work here. Frankly, I have a feeling they have not even got the ABCs of parliamentary democracy right. They don't seem to understand that the entire basis for a parliamentary system, as it was created and as we've now established in our country, is for the Council of Ministers to be accountable to Parliament. That's the whole logic of parliamentary democracy. When Parliament is in session, you come to Parliament, you talk to Parliament, you discuss all major issues in Parliament. This government will only see Parliament at its convenience, will attend Parliament at its convenience. The Prime Minister hasn't been seen for days, and will only speak to it on issues it chooses to consider convenient to speak on. So this issue, there's a major breach in Parliament security. There was a great deal of concern amongst the opposition. They asked for a statement from the Home Minister. He's been giving statements to the media, mind you. He's been issuing statements, giving interviews and so on. But while the Parliament is in session, his fundamental duty of coming and speaking to the Parliament, he has completely ignored. So that's a basic tenet of parliamentary democracy cast aside. The second request of the opposition was that there should be a discussion on the overall issue, starting, of course, with the Home Minister's statement. That discussion hasn't happened either. And those who have requested the discussion were suspended. So the result was each of us felt, out of solidarity with our colleagues, that when those who want democracy are being kicked out of the temple of democracy, then the temple of democracy is no longer fit for worship.
Do you believe that there is a danger of a redundancy of parliamentary proceedings if, for example, by the end of this winter session, all of the opposition members of parliament are out? Bills are still being passed. The BJP still has the numbers.
Well, that's exactly the point. The bills can be passed anyway, but the whole purpose of parliamentary debate is, number one, to hear a wide representative selection of views from across political representatives throughout the country. Secondly, to place significant objections on record. In fact, the Supreme Court pointed out last year in a case that when there is no debate in Parliament on a piece of legislation, it is impossible for the judiciary to understand legislative intent. And therefore, the debate, even if the result is a foregone conclusion, is important in itself. Because when we in the opposition point out what's wrong with the bills, the government stands up and explains itself, defends itself, or justifies the way it's drafted the bill, or better still, if it changes the bill, which this government almost never does, then the judges also have a good basis when a case comes up to be able to judge what the government intended to do. Now, all that has been has gone by the board. And what they're doing, quite simply, is today already, since I was suspended just before lunchtime, we have seen 3 bills being introduced hastily, quote unquote, debated by their own side and passed. That's no democracy. It's a travesty of parliamentary democracy. And I fear that it's an insult to the spirit of the Constitution that Dr. Ambedkar and his colleagues have given us 73 years ago.
More on parliamentary democracy in just a moment. But as you said, you've always been the proverbial good boy. I take it that personally, in normal circumstances, you're not a fan of disruptions that lead members of parliament to the well.
No, I'm not a fan for a number of reasons. I think that, when you're in an institution, you abide by the codes of that institution. And that applies to whether you're in government or in opposition. So normally, I tend to argue, first of all, in favor of upholding the standards of parliamentary behavior and decorum that are conventional to Parliament. Indeed, I remember when I first became an MP in 2009, a sort of course was offered to us about do's and don'ts, and it was chaired and addressed by no less than Pranab Mukherjee himself. So it was something that was conveyed to us as something of great importance. Mind you, that didn't stop the BJP, which had the numbers in those days, from frequently paralyzing the House during our time, but that's another matter. At least we felt we were upholding the right standards. But when we came into the opposition, I'm afraid the golden rule, many of you have been to missionary schools, you've heard the golden rule, do unto others as you should have them do unto you. Well, the golden rule in Parliament is do unto others what they have already done unto you. And so the opposition decided to do to the BJP what the BJP had done to it. And we've seen disruptions again. And I've argued within opposition spaces that this is never a good idea, because especially when you have very modest numbers, as we do by comparison with the BJP, who had more than double the numbers we had when they were in opposition. So given the numbers we have, it's rather easy for the government to pass bills amid the din, or as they've done this time and on occasion last time, they would simply suspend enough people and then go ahead and do what they want to do. So the problem is, because of the disruption, the opposition loses an opportunity to place its point of view on the record, to raise questions to ministers under question hour, to place constituency matters before the public in 0 hour, to introduce matters of public importance under Rule 377, and of course to participate in debates on subjects that matter, and seek, therefore, on those debates, the guidance of the House, as well as, in many ways, just place things on record for posterity. I know some of my speeches in Parliament in losing causes on debates which were bound to end with the government getting a lopsided majority have enjoyed an excellent shelf life on YouTube, and I've watched and have witnessed very many larger numbers of views than I've ever had, obviously during the day itself in Parliament. And so, to my mind, all of these are good reasons for us to ensure that we actually participate in debates rather than disrupt. But very often the government seems to enjoy provoking the opposition, bringing them to the point where they absolutely feel they have no choice but to object vociferously, and then, of course, you can throw them out.
So let me present to you 2 or 3 arguments made by the government today, starting with the Prime Minister, who addressed the parliamentary party meet of the BJP. And at this meeting, he said that the opposition, while demanding a discussion and a statement on the security breach, actually contains members of parliament who have justified this breach. His reference clearly was to Rahul Gandhi, who linked the breach to unemployment numbers in India. This is the statement coming from the Prime Minister. How do you respond? That actually, while suggesting that this is a very serious breach, it could have, been much worse than it was, lives could have been lost, actually, Mr. Gandhi, your leader, has justified, according to the Prime Minister, the breach that took place.
Well, I wouldn't see that as a justification. I think it was an explanation. He was obviously deploring the breach while saying that the breach occurred because people are so desperate in their situation of unemployment that they would do almost anything to draw attention to their problem. We in Parliament have tried to draw attention to unemployment by raising the issues, by asking for discussions under particular rules. There's a rule called 193 in the Lok Sabha, under which we wanted a discussion on unemployment. We weren't granted it. So to that degree, Rahul Gandhi is making the point, it seems to me, that let's not forget that though what they did was a terrible thing, this was what led them to do it, according to their own statements. as reported in the media and after their police interrogation. So it seems to me that there's a difference between an explanation, which is what he was giving, and a justification, which is what he's being accused of doing.
Were you comfortable with those statements from Mr. Gandhi? Would you have made those statements right after the breach?
Okay, that's not a question that's fair to ask. I mean, you ask the person who made the statements. This is the way I heard the statements, and this is the way I've understood them. I can't hear you. You muted yourself.
Let me put forth another argument put forth by the government. There was a member of the opposition, Kalyan Banerjee of the Trinamool Congress. He was on the steps with many other of your colleagues. You were also on the steps briefly. And he mimicked, I'm not going to play out that clip because we don't have time for that right now, but he mimicked the vice president. The vice president later said that he was, he thought it was ridiculous. He was very hurt. His standing as the farmer had been, in a sense, mocked. That's how he saw it. And much was made by the BJP of the fact that Rahul Gandhi filmed Kalyan Banerjee as he was mimicking Mr. Dhankar, and this was called a kind of, by the BJP and its supporters, an insult of a constitutional position. How do you respond to that controversy?
Barkha, frankly, I cannot comment on something I didn't personally witness. But I will say to you that, this is the kind of triviality that the media lesser lights than you have been rightly accused of focusing on rather than the substantive issues.
I'm just quoting the BJP. That's all I'm doing here. I'm not rationalizing their argument.
I didn't witness it, so I won't comment on it. But I will say that honestly, we are facing in the last couple of days a very major threat to parliamentary democracy. We are seeing a situation. Look at the way in which for the previous 75 years this parliament has functioned. The government has seen it as having an interest in ensuring parliament works. It goes out of its way to reach an accommodation where possible with the opposition and gets them to come along. I can imagine if it was our situation when we were in power and our Home Minister, there was a demand for him to come, we would have said, please go and speak to Parliament for a few minutes so that we can diffuse this crisis. That's the normal way. We've always taken seriously, every government before this, the idea that it's the government's principal responsibility to ensure that Parliament functions. And very often, prime ministers, no less, would go out of their way to accommodate the interests of the opposition. I remember Dr. Manmohan Singh calling opposition leaders to breakfast at his home, trying to pacify them, understand their concerns, assuage them, and then have his ministers and the particular parliamentary affairs minister in parliament ensure that the opposition was given a due share of voice when it came to important issues. All that has been completely cast aside, Barkha. We're looking at something which is unprecedented in the parliamentary conventions of our country. We are looking at a situation where the government essentially seems to be saying, frankly, we don't care if there is an opposition present or not. We don't care what the views of the other side are. All we care about is running a tranquil parliament and passing bills as we see fit. And to my mind, this is not what parliament's all about. Why have a parliament at all if you don't respect the canons and the conventions of parliamentary democracy? You're using this hallowed institution essentially as a rubber stamp for what you want to do as a government and as a notice board for what your side wants to proclaim to the nation. That is not what parliamentary democracy is supposed to be.
So you are worried that Parliament, the entire meaning of Parliament, the entire relevance of Parliament is under question today.
Exactly.
How do you plan to counter it?
Well, unfortunately, we can't counter it within Parliament, so all we can do is counter it outside Parliament. We are talking to you, we're talking to the media in general, we are expressing our views and concerns, we're flagging to the nation how grave is the threat to parliamentary democracy. And some colleagues are even talking about holding a mock parliament outside the House, because if you can't be able to do your job as a parliamentarian inside Parliament, at least let us address these issues outside and invite perhaps the media and through the media the national public to listen to what we have to say. I can't think of any other better solution. Ultimately, the government we elect has to be the custodian of our democracy. The government has to take a sacred pledge to uphold the Constitution, and not just the letter of the Constitution, but the spirit of the Constitution. This government, sadly, has shown nothing but contempt for both the letter and the spirit.
Now, What we're looking at is a record number of suspensions. Never before have so many members of parliament been suspended, and in a single day, that record was, in fact, crossed yesterday. But the BJP again harks back to history, 1989, when the Congress was in government. Rajiv Gandhi was the prime minister. The Thakkar Commission report had been placed, and you saw more than 60 members of parliament ousted at that moment. Do you believe that this?
The Thakkar Commission on Mrs. Indira Gandhi's assassination.
That's right. That's right. Do you believe that there is a kind of role swapping that takes place between government and opposition when it comes to disruptions? There is a larger question here, or do you believe there's something that's happened this time that is different from previous times? See, like I'm saying, for those of us of a certain vintage, we have seen roles swapped between the BJP and the Congress on parliamentary disruptions. Right?
That is literally the only example the BJP can cite, because that was an extremely extreme circumstance, and a huge ruckus was apparently created. I wasn't there at the time. I don't know if you were, but certainly, yes, there was a huge ruckus created on that occasion, and the speaker at the time decided that suspension was necessary. Having said that, you can't find too many other examples, whereas in this government's tenure, suspensions have become practically a daily occurrence. We have witnessed parliamentarians sitting on hunger strike outside Parliament for how long and for over how many years of this government's functioning. We've seen people standing on the steps, going to Mahatma Gandhi's statue, essentially because they are not given their due place of honor inside the Parliament. And this is something which has happened far too often for it to be just a coincidence or unusual sort of swapping of roles or whatever you said. It is quite simply a systematic effort by the government, the ruling party, to negate the voice of the opposition. That's the real issue we have here, Barkha. It's a very serious issue. I would say that a very different approach from the government should have been possible, that they should have reached out to the opposition on this issue as soon as the first concerns were expressed. I remember the speaker called floor leaders for a meeting in his chamber. They made it very clear what they wanted. He should then have turned to the government and said, ask the Home Minister to come. This is important enough. We've got to let Parliament function. We have important bills before us. And the Home Minister should have come. All that he said to the media the same day and the next day he could have said in Parliament. Then you allow a few of the floor leaders to say a few words to express their concerns. You defuse the crisis and you go on. That is what, honestly, people like me expected. Instead, we had a needlessly confrontational approach. And somehow this goes right to the heart of the way the BJP likes to function with Parliament. I mean, I was personally myself shocked, for example, when I was divested of the External Affairs Committee and the chairmanship was given to a BJP member, because the history of parliamentary committees, throughout the history, we have always had an opposition member chairing the External Affairs Committee to convey to the world that in India on foreign affairs we're united. Even such a simple convention that's in the government's interest, the government didn't care to respect when they replaced me. And of course, they did it again when inconvenient questions came up in the next committee. I was given the IT committee. Be that as it may, I don't want to reduce this to a personal issue. It was a striking lesson that parliamentary conventions and practices that certainly were upheld, whoever was in power beforehand, are no longer being upheld since 2019. That's the big change in this government's functioning with Parliament. I don't think it's a straightforward swapping of roles. I don't think there is a parallel between what was done by previous governments and this government in its attitude to Parliament and in its disdain for making any effort on its part to let Parliament function with the opposition having a voice.
You said you were shocked when you were divested of your position as chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Affairs, a post typically or traditionally held by the opposition. Did you ever raise it with anybody in the BJP?
Of course, I raised it with everybody, starting with the minister. And they were very uncomfortable. They didn't know what to say. In fact, the Foreign Affairs Minister himself was surprised because he and I had been having meetings discussing what would be the issues we wanted to take up in the committee during the next term. And suddenly I was no longer chair. So it was clearly a decision made for political reasons at a political level. But the problem is not just me or one committee. It's the entire attitude towards parliamentary convention. They don't believe it matters. They just don't believe. See, parliaments develop an ethos that is built up over a period of time. To have a convention like, for example, the opposition chairing that committee is part of what Parliament is all about. It's also a way, frankly, not just of conveying a signal to the world, but also reassuring the opposition look, we know you need an honored place here and you will have it. Another example that doesn't so much concern me, we used to send, as you know, opposition MPs to the UN General Assembly as part of the national delegation every year. And opposition MPs would get a taste of speaking for India on particular debates. It may have been minor ones, whatever, but they got that sense of pride in representing India, sitting behind a nameplate saying India speaking there. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was a regular opposition member of many delegations to the UN. This government has scrapped the entire practice. They no longer send MPs, let alone any opposition MPs. Why? I mean, when you think about all of this, why is it that the opposition, that being in the opposition is treated by this government as a crime? As if somehow they are so much the embodiments of all that is good and virtuous in Indian democracy and in the Indian Republic and in Indian civilization, that anyone who opposes them ipso facto does not deserve respect. That's a terrible attitude to bring to parliamentary democracy.
Can I ask you, just in the last couple of minutes, on your own suspension, you said it was the first time you actually went towards the well. The Parliamentary Affairs Minister later suggested that you and others, the suspensions today were because you carried placards that seemed to meme the Prime Minister. Do you know why you were suspended? Were you told why you were suspended?
No. When they rattled off 40-odd names, they didn't give any reasons for individuals. The placard I carried merely said, and there's a photograph of it taken by the media, merely said, we want a discussion on the security breach.
Is this the one? Are these the posters you all were carrying?
No,
can you see them?
I didn't carry those. I didn't. I just carried a white one with black lettering. And other media have carried the pictures. It simply said, we want a discussion on the security breach. That was all. And that was all indeed the original protesters were asking for. So that was it. But frankly, by today, I think it became necessary to violate the rule about placards, which I've never violated in my life before. And the reason was that the injustice of what had happened was so great, and what is done to my other colleagues, that for us to actually be the good boys and girls and not attract suspension almost put us on the wrong side. I think it was better for us to say, we will take whatever punishment, the Gandhian approach. We will violate your rule. You punish us as you see fit, because your rule and the way you're applying it is unjust. That's what Mahatma Gandhi said the first time when he was taken before a judge in Champaran after the agitation. And he said, look, give me the most severe punishment that you can think of, because your law is unjust and I'm proud to violate it. That was the spirit in which many of us acted today.
Now, in this case, your suspension is only till the end of Parliament, which is 2 days from now. But there are 11 members of Parliament whose case has actually been referred to the privileges panel, which means possibly 3 months. My point is, it's going to be the last budget session of Parliament. Are you concerned that there might be a budget session with, I don't know, this could repeat?
I certainly hope not. I mean, I really think that what the government and the Parliamentary Affairs Minister, and ideally even more senior ministers, should do before the budget session is to reach out to the opposition leaders, not just in a public sort of all-party meeting that is there with the cameras present, but rather in private and in a decent way, and say, listen, we don't want to mess these things up. Let's, for God's sake, make our system work. Please come, whatever it is that they want to accomplish, and seek cooperation. I've not seen that spirit that one should normally see in a parliamentary democracy. And if they can reach out and do it, so be it. But as you know, this budget session is not really a full-fledged budget session. It's going to be a vote on account. The whole thing may be over in a week anyway, so that even if there were a disruption and people were suspended, it would be for a shorter period of time, rather like this particular suspension. I'm not saying that I'm encouraging disruption or suspension. Let's get this very clear. I really hope that we can function normally. But my plea to those on the ruling party side is, please do this in the interest of our democracy. You will not always be top dog. You will not always be the ones wielding the rules in your interest. Safeguard the spirit of democracy, because one day you too will need it.
Yeah, that's true. But the Prime Minister says all of you are rattled. That's what he said to his MPs today.
Rattled? By what?
By the recent defeat in the assembly elections.
Oh, that had nothing to do with this. I mean, there were debates after that. I myself spoke in Parliament. I mean, the election results were out before Parliament convened. We went along peacefully for a week and a half, almost 2 weeks, and then this trouble started, which we didn't anticipate. None of us knew there was going to be a parliament security breach. The breachers, as it were given passes by BJP MP. Ask him. He's still merrily sitting in parliament while those asking for a debate on his folly are the ones being suspended.
How does this end? How does this end? The government isn't budging. The opposition isn't budging. How does this end finally?
Well, I'm afraid this ends with the session probably being called off after passing bills that have never been debated and discussed, and which itself renders Parliament into a travesty.
Well, it will be interesting to see if you actually go through with your idea of a mock Parliament session, maybe a shadow cabinet. Maybe the opposition too has to now start thinking out of the box.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I certainly would be in favor of doing something along these lines. And I'm glad that, as you can see on your screens, the India Alliance has got together and they're having a meeting on the way forward, because if we are going to have any meaningful hope of preventing a recurrence of this kind of behavior, it can only be with some serious opposition unity as well.
Well, Shashi Tharoor, suspended Congress Member of Parliament for the next 3 days at least. Thank you for talking to us. You have raised some very serious issues, and I just want to end with an irony that I'm sure has struck you. And I say this in a completely non-political way. This has nothing to do with BJP Congress for me. But someone accused of sexual harassment like Brij Bhushan Saran Singh is still a member of Parliament. So there are ironies to underline here as well, right?
I'm afraid so. Plenty of ironies in the way in which Parliament is run by those who have the privilege of running it.
Thank you, Shashi. And let's see how the space develops, what happens in Parliament over the remaining 48 to 72 hours that are left of it. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, Barkha. Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Mojo Story has always made a commitment to its viewers to go to where the story is. And as you can see here, we are at the epicenter of the Israel war on Gaza. We are right at the front line, about 1 mile from the Gaza Strip, as the Israeli military gets ready with its tanks and its gunners to begin its final frontal assault that will take troops into Gaza. As we said, we are not like other organizations. We believe in giving you all sides of the story objectively and as much as possible from the ground. And that's exactly what we're doing here, covering the biggest global story today from the epicenter of the war zone. So please, we need your support. Support us, become a Mojo member, subscribe to us, spread the word, and thank you for your support.